is Angela Atherton, and I am the Executive Director of SVP Seattle. And we are here for our second learning session in our Poverty and Wealth Inequality Learning. So thank you for coming, and I think Angela just left, but I wanted to give a big thank you to Bird Bar Place. If you have not been here before, this is a really special place in the city, and as on your way out, I encourage you to look at some of the boards and the story of Roberta Bird Bar and support this place. We have this here not only because it's stunning, but because we want to highlight this in the community. And Beth, I think you might even talk about it. I don't know. You were part of its more recent story.
Yeah,
so
I don't know that would do it justice.
no. But welcome. Before we get started, I'd love to hear what drew a couple of you to come tonight. Anybody?
Well,
Karen, I'm going to call you.
I'm new here. I've been here a year and 3 months last Friday. And so I say yes to everything. Number one. Number two, it's a struggle that I have, and so I want to hear from other people and meet new people that I don't know. So those are the 3 things that brought me.
Awesome, thank you.
I couldn't come to the first one, but I definitely want to come to this one and 2 more.
For joining us. Does that, one more person, maybe from this side, want to share? What drew them tonight? Laura.
I'll share. Hi, I'm Laura. I'm the interim executive director at EarthGen. So my connection with SVP is that we were a grantee and a partner for many years under Washington Green Schools, and then we transitioned to EarthGen. And I adore SVP. We have a long history, and it's really been transformational for our organization. And I think the topic for me is just something that we're talking about internally a lot, about sort of how wealth and philanthropy shows up in our fundraising practices and our relationships with donors. And so I'm just really interested in learning and hearing and just being in community with other people who are really interested in the topic. So I was really grateful to Amico for hosting this for the SVP community. It's a really neat opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Well, welcome again. If you're not familiar with SVP or if you haven't engaged in a while, we see that SVP is a community of people and organizations working together to create more just communities using philanthropy. And we define our philanthropy as personally meaningful gifts of time, talent, treasure, and ties. And if you want to share that, Lady Letty, would you mind standing up? We have sweatshirts available for anyone, available as a gift for anyone that came tonight. We have different sizes in the back, so grab one on your way out. One of the things that we do at SVP Seattle is that we learn together so that we can act. And so this series is part of actually an advocacy learning series. Advocacy is really new to us, but understanding that we want to not just learn and share our time and our talent and our treasure and our ties through grant making or through individual giving, but through our actions and really advocacy meaning policy advocacy. This is the second in the series I mentioned. The first was called Foundations of Wealth Inequality with Anne E. Price, and I know some of you were there and some of you were not, but really the main takeaways there were that for me, at least, were one, this phenomenal chart about it was called the blocks and what was it? It was boosters. The policy boosters and blockers for wealth accumulation from United for a Fair Economy. Just phenomenal chart. But really, what I took away personally was the difference between income and wealth. That we can create a lot of mechanisms for people to acquire income, but that wealth is really capped with few, and that's not accident. That we have policies demonstrated through that chart, centuries of policies that have created that, and to really have those just communities, we need to actually start looking at breaking down those blocks and having more boosters. Tonight, we're going to hear from people who are really active in their own giving, either through their organizations or through their individual giving about, really starting to remove those blocks. This is supposed to be really an intimate conversation. We want people to feel like, this is 2 ways. We are joined by 4 really special guests tonight. I'm gonna quickly introduce people just closest to me down. So Beth McCaw, you are the founder and I'm gonna let, because I wouldn't do justice to describing threshold philanthropy, but I met Beth, well, you were executive director of the Washington Women's Foundation, and she's transitioned to really doing some phenomenal work with Threshold that I've had to see just a sliver of and is incredibly inspiring. And just thank you for joining us. Shri is with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and is really thinking about all of this work as well. I think both through your individual work, but also what the Gates Foundation is thinking about wealth and poverty and inequality. And then Kathy and Dave Heaven, long-time SVP Seattle partners who have thought deeply about this. I know we've had conversations, and Kathy's been really active in recent wage inequality work in the city of Seattle, so we're lucky to hear that. And so with that, I really want all of you to be able to introduce yourself in your own words. And if anybody would like, maybe I'll start with you, just so we'll go the other way around. So I'm going to hand you the mic.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. So Kathy and I have been SVP partners for about 23 years now, ever since I left Microsoft in 2000. And we both served on multiple grant committees, several advocacy committees, and we've taken advantage of many of the SVP learning sessions and to learn more about philanthropy as well as the whole nonprofit sector. And that's really been instrumental in helping our personal giving. I personally spent over 15 years doing lots and lots of volunteer projects for various nonprofits on the technology side, creating database systems for many SVP investees as well as other nonprofits in the Puget Sound area. And I recently joined the SVP board.
Hi, everyone. And so in addition to our philanthropy that we've kind of gone on this journey together as a couple, individually I've served on a number of different boards and committees in the education space on the east side, in Kirkland and Bellevue. And I also got involved early on in the collective action organization Eastside Pathways, which brings together cradle to career organizations to really try to identify inequities in the system that create unequal outcomes and to ensure that all kids are successful cradle to career. And I'm currently board chair of Eastside Pathways. So Emiko asked us to talk a little bit about our journey of philanthropy, and as Dave said, that kind of started when he left Microsoft in 2000. We knew that at a very young age, we had an amount of money that we could not, nor should we be spending on ourselves. We had this early vision that we should be sharing that and giving back to community. So we set up a supporting foundation and put money there and said, okay, we're going to be philanthropic. We had 2 small young children, but we started on that journey. Most of our giving before then had been donated through United Way. So with our joining SVP, we learned a lot about a lot of different nonprofits, and that really expanded our knowledge about nonprofits and really the good work that was being done in the community. We've almost always given unrestricted gifts. We're very interested in the nonprofits know best what they need, so we've been, so most of our gifts have been unrestricted. When we first started out giving, we probably gave about 16 grants, and now we support over 70 organizations, and we tend to do year-over-year support those organizations because, as I've heard somebody say, a nonprofit leader say before, you know, you need the money every year because you're doing the good work every year.
So initially when we set up the foundation, we were mostly focused on nonprofits who were supporting education and basic needs. But as we learned more through SVP, as well as just my interaction with nonprofits, and as we became more knowledgeable, we realized that we really needed to be investing more in early learning, as well as all the other family support nonprofits that really help make a family successful for their kids. And you know, I learned that, you know, research shows that like dollars invested in early learning are, you know, way more powerful than trying to remediate issues by the time kids are already in school and struggling. So that was kind of our first shift in our giving.
Kind of doing this tag team. Our second shift was realizing that it's really important to fund the programs that support families and youth and kids, but it's also really important to make the changes in our society that need to be made. So we decided to add in more organizations that were doing that advocacy piece, as well as, you know, not just being tied to C3 dollars. The organization we set up, the foundation we set up, had to have C3 dollars, but that's okay. We had more money in the bank. We could write checks to C4 and PAC. So we also started to expand to advocacy organizations, you know, SVP included, but Progress Alliance. We learned about First Mile that supported BIPOC candidates, and in order to lead change that they knew that they needed to see for their community. So funding of advocacy organizations was really the next kind of shift in our funding.
Then our third focus change kind of started around 2017 when we became more aware of how traditional philanthropy was really not serving the BIPOC community well, and how you know, the funding just doesn't go to the organizations that are in the traditional white-led orgs. And so that made us pause, and so we decided we really needed to analyze our own giving. And we saw that, yeah, we were mostly giving to traditional white-led orgs. And so we've made it a real point since then. We've really changed our focus. So we've added a lot of new organizations in the last 4 years, and over 90% of them are BIPOC-led. As well as we've begun to invest much more funds into pooled funds that are actually controlled by the BIPOC community, and they get the decision-making power on how that money should be spent, because they know best what their community needs, and it's not our role to dictate what the solutions are. They know, so we want to empower them.
The next big shift that we had, which probably started around 2017, probably was accelerated in 2019, 2020, was this realization is that we wanted to spend our wealth in our lifetime. We do not want to, we have 2 kids, they'll receive a small amount to help pay for buy houses. They will receive a little bit, some of our family, but we are going to spend this wealth. And guess what? Our wealth grows. It keeps on growing in the stock market. So we end up having more money than we have reason to spend ourselves. And with this kind of this idea that we feel obligated to share that wealth and to shift power, and with money comes power, shift that wealth. So we have this pledge to ourselves that we will spend it within our lifetime. And we have conversations about how do you do that and how fast do you ramp up. So one example is that in 2023, we donated 10 times as much as we gave in 2014. So we have this ramp up. Some of it is because we were able to give some of these larger gifts to these pooled funds. So then that really makes us feel that we don't have to be the ones to decide where it goes. And so that's kind of that shift.
So over the years, we've always strived to continue to learn and evolve our philanthropy. And we also have really tried to be public and share our views and lend our voice around trust-based philanthropy, wealth inequality, wage equity, and investing in communities and leaders of color. And so I'm sure as our journey will continue, we will continue to learn and help support the nonprofits.
And just one last thing, Laura, when you introduced yourself, it made me think, so as we have a relationship with many different executive directors, mostly on the east side of East King County, we have these conversations with them. It's like, we believe in racial equity. We think you should be having conversations about that at your board level, in your staff level. We believe in wage equity. We think that we need to pay those who are doing the work a living wage, and they should have benefits. So the board chair that I'm on, we have that conversation. We drastically increase their wages. And so we're having those conversations in order for the executive directors to know that we as a funder believe in those, so we just want to kind of support them, so that's up to you.
That's us. It's a hard act to follow.
It is.
I don't know if I came as well prepared. I am wearing two hats today, or in life probably have multiple hats and try to juggle them all like most people. But today I come as a daughter of a first-generation immigrant, a family who created wealth in this country and is grappling with a lot of that ideas around wealth inequality. So my parents are SVP members and have been for like 20 years. I'll tell a little bit about our journey around a family philanthropy organization. Around understanding the journey around wealth inequality, I have spent most of my career, the last 15 years, around education reform and building equitable systems in education, and so work at the K-12 team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So there's a lot of learnings that I take from the work that we're doing around kind of ensuring that we are funding partners that are equity first, whether that means the leadership of the organizations or the values of the organizations and the makeup of the organizations that I think about. But also there's a lot of joy in a family foundation that I don't get to have in my day job because yes, I'm thinking about systems change at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on a very kind of strategic level and the national stuff. But there is something about being involved in community and understanding the community-based organizations that you partner with that brings a lot of joy as a family. So growing up, my parents immigrated here, and we would spend many summers going back to India. And the idea of wealth inequality was something that I remember as even below the age of 10. Because I would question this idea that why did I have certain affordances while children growing up in developing countries, my cousins, first generation, did not have the same. Did they not have the same systems or the words that we use today, but healthcare, like basic needs that are afforded. And I remember going back to the village that my father grew up with. All of these just kind of planted seeds at a very young age around the idea of wealth inequality. And the irony being that there's an incredible amount of irony that, when my dad retired from Microsoft, that there is this idea of, oh, well, we're going to create DAFs because someone who was a wealth advisor told you to. And that's a way of creating wealth, right? And so this idea that there's policies and systems in place. And I mention this because when we think about foundations across the US, most of it is about preserving legacy and wealth with certain types of families than it is about giving away. So I applaud your guys' story and recognizing that. And so there's irony that you create a DAF or you create a family foundation to protect, essentially, wealth. And so my journey around understanding inequities in education really came through actually a single story around Leadership Tomorrow, and where I just kind of dove into their Education Challenge Day. We spent the morning at Bellevue schools right after they had gone through a strike, talked to educators, teachers, and this was in 2009. They had just come off of the school district strike then. Educators, teachers, the students, and what they were grappling with, and the teachers were talking about teacher pay, right? And then they told us our box lunches were waiting for us 15 minutes away at Franklin High School. And spent the afternoon talking to the principal and the students, going to the bathroom in the stalls, realizing that there's no soap or toilet paper, or the math teachers talking about that they can't print worksheets because there's no paper. And you're like 15 minutes away and trying to understand how do our tax-paying systems actually create a level of educational inequity from the zip code that students grow up in. So that was my blast into this world around education systems. And The reason why I think I've dove so deep is that I truly believe, even through our family's generational story, my dad growing up in a village in India, that education is a ticket to opportunity and economic opportunity. That in where we grow up here, that without a post-secondary degree, do you not have access to STEM jobs in our economy, and wage-earning jobs really is required either by a post-secondary credential or a bachelor's degree, is access to wage earning to change your family out of generational inequality. So that's my story of why I'm here. We as a family have given funds to both education, where I've traditionally kind of helped form where we're giving, thinking about teacher effectiveness, diversifying the teacher workforce, thinking about STEM, pathways to economic mobility through STEM jobs. And then my sister leads a lot of the work around health care, and without access to good health, can you not have a prosperous life to think about some of these decisions. And then we do a lot of grant making in the community as well. I think that's, yeah, I'm gonna pass it on.
Lots of hard acts to follow. Again, I'm Beth McCaw, and if you're familiar with McCaw Hall, the Opera Hall, I'm not related to those McCaws. McCaw is my maiden name. When we moved here 25 years ago, there were I got invited to join a lot of boards because people assumed that was my family. My husband, we moved here from Atlanta, Georgia for my husband to take a job in tech, and everyone also mistakenly assumed he worked at Microsoft. He did not then, and he does not now. I'm afraid a lot of people had incorrect assumptions about me, and I disappointed them all for many years. But I grew up in rural eastern North Carolina, and my family has been in the United States, in the Carolinas and Tennessee since before the Revolutionary War, at least on one side of the family. So we know that we have benefited from years of stolen land, stolen labor, and genocide. I'm the first member of the family to move west of the Mississippi or north of the Mason-Dixon line, for those of you who know what the Mason-Dixon line is. But I grew up in a community where we just took care of one another. It was community care. I learned to tithe at church. I learned to volunteer. It was just kind of how you lived your life, as you took care of your neighbors. However, I recognize that we lived in a very segregated small community, so there were certain neighbors that you took care of. So at a very young age, I knew that it was important to care, and I also was questioning why some people were worth caring about more than others. I ended up going away to boarding school at 15, still in North Carolina, but I was exposed to girls from all over the world. And that's when I also realized that people, again, there were differences based on religion, there was differences based on race, so it started me questioning my life journey. I ended up in law school. I thought I was going to go into public interest law. And the first couple of experiences that I had in the summer, I didn't have the terminology for it back then, but I knew that there was something wrong about where I was working. And I now know that it's because I did not have lived experience to be in the communities that I was working in. So it was probably a little bit of white saviorism showing up. So I got into law school and thought, oh no, what the hell am I going to do? Like, I don't know what to do. And a mentor, a friend's mother, said, come talk to me. She ended up liking me, said, Beth, you should do what I do, which is estate planning, and I work with a lot of philanthropic families. So you can come work with me, and we'll help families give their money away. And I thought, that's great, but now I laugh because I was in the business of intergenerational wealth hoarding for 16 years. That was my job, to help families hoard their wealth and save taxes in the process. So that, really super interesting to look back on that. So after I moved here, like Karen, I was searching for community, started saying yes to everything, ended up on the board of directors of the YWCA, the Seattle, King, and Snohomish counties. And it's probably been about 15 years ago now, YWCA USA changed our mission to empowering women and eliminating racism. And that board, there were 42 of us, predominantly white women and men on the board, looked at each other and said, what? We know what? Like, what? What do we know about eliminating racism? But when we looked at the work that we did, we were working just smack dab at the intersection of race and gender. So we said, we need to figure out what it means to be an anti-racist organization, because we can see we are in fact a racist organization working to empower women and eliminate racism. So that board leaned heavily into what does it mean to be an anti-racist institution, what does it mean to govern an anti-racist institution. It was, for me, it started to put, there were words for things that I felt like I had been feeling my whole life. And so I just will always be grateful for that experience, and also for the women of color and men of color on that board who leaned into that work and put up with the effing nonsense of us white people on the board who did not know what we were doing and were making mistakes left and right all the time. I then had the opportunity to join the Washington Women's Foundation and practice institutional philanthropy, which is, again, where I like, this is, you know, I can see where we're causing problems too. We were founded about the same time as Social Venture Partners, and I don't know if you all remember that, but that was when Ann Farrell was the CEO of Seattle Foundation. And so there are a couple of folks who said there's tech wealth being amassed in the city, and women are amassing wealth. And no one has taught them how to do philanthropy. So we need to create these two organizations that are basically brother, sister, brother, whatever, all genders. And like, we're gonna teach women, and we're gonna teach new tech wealth, these wealthy new women, or women with new wealth, and new tech wealth, how to do philanthropy. And what struck me about Washington Women's Foundation is our founders were amazing women who, you know, they went to Bill Sr. and asked for funding to start, and he just thought, oh, this is so cute, like a little women's project, I'll, you know, help them with some funding. But they kicked ass, and they gave a lot of money away. And when I joined the foundation, I realized we also practiced philanthropy in a very patriarchal way. Like, we just took men's philanthropy, white men's philanthropy, and put lipstick on a skirt on it. That's what I said. Like, we basically didn't say, like, if we were going to start philanthropy new and differently, what would it look like? We just wanted to take what had been men's philanthropy, high impact, large gifts, put our name on buildings, and do it as women. And, you know, we did that for 20 years, and over the course of 20 years, did not fund one single organization led by a person of color. The Vera Project was ultimately led by Tim Lennon, but he was not the executive director when we funded Vera Project. And so it was like, what are we doing? Like, seriously, what are we doing as a women's foundation? So we had not funded one Black woman leader of a nonprofit in 20 years of history. So it's like, okay, let's get serious and again talk about race and gender equity. And that's when Washington Women's Foundation made the shift to center our philanthropy on. And so I kind of brought my own agenda. I told you should never, as an executive director, bring your own agenda to an organization. But to be fair, when I was interviewing for the job, I told them I'm a constructive disruptor because I had been a member of the foundation. I could see that it needed to change. I said, if you are afraid of change, I'm not the right person to hire. I'm going to come in and I'm going to shift things because I had seen the shift and how important it was at the YWCA, and I'm like, I can't, like, this has to change. So to that board's credit, and I think to your board's credit, they've allowed our democratically elected values that are more inclusive. Yeah, so I appreciate you bringing up that point. Laura.
Thank you. I first just want to say thank you so much. This is such a cool opportunity, and I'm so so grateful for all of you sharing your knowledge and experience. I don't know how many other nonprofit staff are here, but my whole profession has been working in the nonprofit sector, and I moved to Seattle in 2002 to go to grad school, and I have watched SVP and Washington Women's Foundation grow and evolve over the years. I was actually an intern at Washington Women's Foundation when I was in grad school. I worked for 2 nonprofits that have received SVP funding. But I have so many questions for all of you that I think I want to direct maybe to Kathy and David, because what you were saying about just how you're showing up as funders. So when you're saying you're investing in pay equity and livable wages and unrestricted dollars and multi-years, like as a fundraiser, that makes me want to cry. It's like, it's the unicorn of funding, right? And to me, that's you also understanding and listening to what nonprofits need. And I'm curious how that shows up for you among your peers. Because I think there's, when I have relationships with funders, it's only after we build a long relationship of trust that I can really talk about what we need. And there's an inherent power dynamic. So I can't show up, there's so many funders that you jump through so many hoops to get $5,000, and they ask so much, and you're kind of stuck, and you can do it or you cannot do it, maybe you have the resources to do it. But when I have a funder that is giving unrestricted multi-year dollars, that's such a gift, and it says that there's trust. And I share that back with funders that I have a relationship with, but I don't do that with all funders. And so I'm just curious, I think you're sitting in a seat that has a lot of influence over peers and in your community, so I'm just wondering how your style of philanthropy resonates with your peers and what you hear back from folks, and if you see any influence around your style of funding.
Really have a lot of steps today.
Well, I mean, I think credit to SVP, Progress Alliance, these organizations, Washington Women's Foundation, not as familiar with, but that are having these conversations. So that is really where funders can start to talk to one another about it, and kind of figure it out as long as, as we go. I would say, I mean, we try to do that, and it's funny, because sometimes we'll talk to executive directors and they're a little bit in disbelief, like, well, sure, we need to meet. It's like, no, we don't need to meet. Like, we don't need a report. Like, and we tend not to say, oh, this is how much funding for 3 years, because we've been trying to ramp up our funding. So we're like, we don't want to lock you into this much money per year, because we want to, ramp you up. So, so we just try to be very forthright with the organizations that we fund. But I would say that executive directors and nonprofit staff, be vocal, be courageous, say it. Say to all of your funders, I'm writing a letter to all of our funders, this is what we need. Share with them Lou's blog. It's the greatest source of inspiration, even if sometimes buttons can be pushed. But you just have to continue to share. We have to shift the nonprofit system, and you have to have the conversations. And you might lose funders. I mean, that's what Beth was talking about. You could lose some funders, but hopefully you'll gain more funders. But it's all about relationship, build relationship, let funders know you want to be in relationship with them, and just try to have that honesty. In Eastside Pathways, we always use Grace Your Space, which is something, don't just get right to the heart of it, just like make sure you connect with them, individually, so that you can connect as people in humanity. So he's gonna add.
I'm going to add and build upon the capacity building piece, because as a family foundation, I think we kind of evolved. I loved how you guys' story about how you changed over different years. That was very creative. Because if I would go back and go, there was a point when we were, I would call it like family check writing, right? You're like you're supporting organizations that you believe are doing good work. And then there's a relationship building that happens that shifts your mindset mindset to going, there is a bright spot here, they are delivering a value add to the community, or they're getting outcomes to a set of kids, if it's, how, if they were to have their magic wand, or how can they grow to serve more? So I do think that our family has been pushing a little bit on capacity building, and I would say, and scale. So if you could grow your program, what would it take? If you could serve X number more schools, X number more sites, what would it take? And so pushing on the organization to think about I think their existing walls sometimes is like, but it takes capacity to get there as well. So you need to be able to support them to be able to continue to operate what they're doing and think about what would it take to go outside of their current zone. So I would say capacity building and scale. So.
I would offer, because we do similar things. You know, it's all unrestricted general operating support, multi-year. And we do quite a bit of peer organizing. So our funded partners know that if they are having a bad experience with another funder, that they can come talk to us. And there's nothing like peer pressure. Like, it shouldn't be on you. Just like as an executive director, it's not on you to correct bad board behavior. That's your board chair's job. Like funders. And so we also show up in spaces like collaborative funding projects. Like, we were part of a group that funded organizing around the census and then redistricting, but we were at the table with other funders. And so when we were talking about reporting back, and you know, those of us who don't require reports, we're just like, for those of you who do, why? Like, so you know, in these collaborative funding pools with other funders, then we were able to kind of push a little bit for everyone in that direction. We're like, well, it's collaborative funding, it's low risk. Like, why don't you just try it and see how it works? Oh, there wasn't a report back, and they did the work. Look at that, we had a conversation. The work got done. Woo. So I think there are, you know, don't be afraid to ask your friends in the funding community to kind of help push their peers or deliver the bad news for you, because that's on us, because we're the ones causing harm when we think we're causing good. And some of it's just that realization, like, I had no idea. Like, I had no idea that was harmful, because it's been institutionalized as a best practice in our sector. And I think the more we break away from these institutionalized best practices to actually getting out of people's way to let them do the work. So I think it's just asking the question, yeah, will you help me out?
I remember when the Ballmer Foundation kind of announced that they weren't going to require reporting anymore, and that the way that they were going to behave was to say to the folks that they decided to fund, you report to us however you want. You know, we don't, please tell us how you're sort of analyzing your progress and, you know, impact on outcomes, but you tell us how, in the way you want to tell us. And then that seemed to kind of like shift things across the nonprofit community here. It seemed.
I think all of us talking about what we're doing and why we're doing it, it does make a difference, even as an individual. Like, how you make decisions and build relationships, it makes a difference.
Other questions? And I know you have it. Give me the mic. It's for the camera.
I love the way you guys have shared, and I really applaud and appreciate each and every one of you. And you've all talked about sort of systems and policies, and I'm wondering if you've thought about what systems and policies might philanthropy be able to address so there isn't such a horrendous need in this country in particular for nonprofits to deliver basic services.
Washington State, so flipping the tax code. I mean, if we didn't have such huge wealth inequity in our state, then not as many families would need food assistance, housing assistance, housing policy, right? So all of those things, Dave and I were big proponents of capital gains. And yeah, so, and I even just scratched my head that it just, like, that it took so much effort to get it passed, and then there was a lawsuit, and, you know, we funded a lawsuit to get it, to keep it, you know, in, and then lo and behold, like, all this money is flowing to families, and so, in terms of the working families tax credit. So, those kind of policies are super important. That's just what kind of comes up, and a wealth tax. The inequities is just crazy making. I mean, just two of us went to University of Washington, you know, had just regular careers in tech. Like, why do we have so much wealth? It's crazy making. It's just wrong.
And you think to whom I just gave the budget for.
And that too.
I can't pretend to explain it, but I know that it exists, which is the breakdown between state educational dollars that break down to neighborhood based on like value of homes. So the tax, yeah,
So much of education, property tax.
property taxes. The reason why I say I can't explain it is, even though I've been working in education for like 15 years, is that at the state level, there are policies in place that says that dollars should be distributed equally, but that breaks down based on property taxes, yeah.
Probably sound really stupid, but you know, fundamentally, our country was built to protect people with power and privilege to retain their power and privilege. And so when you look at the academics, the scholars that have studied reparations, it was not easy. We lost members. I took a lot of it in the chin, and I was glad to do it. But it's all, you know, really taught me a lot. And so when I left Washington Women's Foundation in early 2021, I conspired with one of my former colleagues, Morgan Dawson, an amazing Black queer woman, and Lindsay Hill, who left the Rakes Foundation to come with Morgan and me and kind of think about philanthropy differently. And so the three of us co-founded Threshold Philanthropy 2.5 years ago. So I'll leave it at that and let you ask what other questions you have.
Great. Oh, and I don't need to. Is this on?
Yeah.
Thank you. I guess I never turned it off. So the way that this format will work is I'm going to just kick off with moderator's privilege and ask a question, but this is really meant to be a conversation. I am going to call on people. We left index cards if you just want to take notes or think about your question ahead of time, but if you were here last time, we're not going to pass them up to me. We're just going to let you kind of raise your hand and allow everyone to ask questions. So I'm going to ask, Kathy, you opened the door to talk about really policy change. And one of the, you know, I gave the introduction that really, I am so inspired by all of the work that you've done. And I am curious, how often in your own giving do you hear from the nonprofits you work with or the leaders that you work with, how often do you come across not just funding as a barrier, but policy change as a barrier? And how, as philanthropists, have you responded to that? And Kathy, it's a loaded question for you to maybe answer, to talk a little bit more about some of the current wage equity work going on, and I'll let Shri and Beth think about that question. So just, you know, how often do you encounter policy challenges, not just funding challenges, and how have you, as either through Threshold or Gates or your family foundation, thought about, like, what's my role in this?
That is a big question. So I will say that policy change can happen in so many different ways. So policy change can happen at individual nonprofits that are running programs, because you can change policies within that organization that serve families better, that bring family voices more to the center. You can change policy that take care of your employees better. Change policies that build better boards. So there's so many different policies that can change, and then those changes can multiply when many different nonprofits are doing them, and then that can change kind of the system of nonprofits. One effort that I did become involved in, I think even Emiko said, oh, you should talk to Kathy, was I joined the Wage Equity Funding Roundtable, Seattle, King County, and they're having conversations with funders about how do we ensure that funding dollars aren't just devoted to get the most programmatic pieces out, but to really truly care for the people who are providing that programming. So there's a big, if you haven't read it, there's a big University of Washington study that was written around inequities in wages, and guess what? It also lines up around race and color of your skin. And so those people who are in social service and nonprofits, who care deeply about their communities and care about those issues also tend to identify as BIPOC, and we're not paying them well, and that has to flip. So being on the Wage Equity Funders Roundtable was really just other funders talking about that's important, and we have to give the message that our dollars should be spent to provide programming, but also to pay people really well. So, and then for us personally, funding efforts that are maybe even think tanks around what, Progress Alliance is a good example. Social Venture Partners in its new incarnation is thinking about those big questions. So we like to fund those because we wanted to see those systems change.
Awesome. Beth, do you want to? No obligation to.
Two specific examples. Sometimes I think philanthropy can be used to show proof points that policy needs to change. So one example, and this kind of goes back 10 years, is that we were doing a lot of research at Washington STEM, who I worked with Ruby Love, who's the board chair of SVP, so that's my connection here today. We were trying to understand how can we better improve professional learning of educators in our state, and knowing that they had to align to better standards around teaching, and that we were going to get high quality teaching if we could get great professional learning. So there's a ton of dollars when you look into at the state level that are dedicated or flagged to professional learning, but are they actually getting outcomes to the students that need it the most? So are the teachers actually improving their skills so that they're actually the teachers that are in front of the classroom that we have the students that we're trying to move? So there's a, and then we realized that the existing it wasn't about that there's a lack of dollars at the state, it was how those dollars were spent. So we, as a philanthropic, so Washington STEM was a pass-through organization, but we were able to prove through piloting with a bunch of schools and districts how innovative professional learning can happen through coaching. And so now you see a lot more coaching models rather than just the sit and get over the, teachers going to a bunch of conferences and thinking that you're actually going to transfer that skill into the classroom. So that's one example of okay, philanthropic dollars can actually test and pilot something, then to see change happen at a greater level. Now I am dealing with policy issues at different states, both Texas and Florida, thinking about what does high quality curriculum look like. And so while my job is to scale high quality curriculum, we have other folks at the foundation who are looking at the standards of different states and going, wait, if these students are asked to learn different things, are they actually going to get the outcomes that are equivalent to other students in different states? So that's just an example of policy is reflective and changing in our everyday lives and can become a barrier sometimes. of thinking about long-term outcomes for priority students, and so it takes smart minds to think about how to remove those barriers.
Can I ask a question about that one sentence?
Yeah.
So when you're talking about that, just that challenge of what does high quality curriculum look like, and considering the extreme diversity of how curriculum is established across the United States and all of the issues down to the school board level and textbook companies and like that, it seems like a huge challenge would be just parsing the problem set, like just understanding who's doing what, where, and how to even just grok it. And then just the part two of, what does that mean then in terms of like standards? I know that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation worked really hard for a long time on sort of looking for like the secret sauce in education, whether it was classroom size or other solutions, and seems like it really does come down to kind of local community issues so often.
Yeah, it's interesting because we now have a 10-year-long math strategy, but we're focused on 4 states. And the reason is that you need to understand those what's going on at each one of those state levels, how they're adopting curriculum, what are the decisions that are being made, and they're all in different cycles, etc. And to look at to your question around like curriculum, we have to look at like how is the curriculum being designed and developed, what kind of guidelines are they adhering to, how are they making it motivating and engaging for students? Just have it their way. Because it's mixed. Yeah, so a lot, I mean, I could go on and on about curriculum, especially math curriculum, but yeah, I think the policy stuff is really interesting. So yeah, what's going on in California is very different than what's going on in Texas or Florida, and the other state that we're looking at is New York, because the reason being is these 4 states have the highest concentration of Black, Latino, and low-income students. If we can make a proof point in these states, we believe that it will scale to other states.
Cool.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And I guess I will just add to this, the experience that we recently had, Social Venture Partners and some other foundations are part of the statewide capacity collaborative. It's a group of funders that have been meeting for over 10 years, I think, to really, originally to just talk about capacity building. Like it wasn't a thing that funders were willing to fund in the non-for-profit sector, so we were trying to normalize capacity building. Most recently, we were involved in writing what we're calling an open letter to support wage equity in the nonprofit sector in direct response to this University of Washington study that found that the human services sector in particular was, woefully under-resourced in terms of salaries and benefits. And we know that there's been a long-going effort on behalf of by this sector to also improve the government contracting rates. Like if you're going to contract with a nonprofit to provide preschool, to provide mental health services to children, and you're not paying them the true cost of the contract, meaning they cannot pay teachers, they cannot compete for teachers, and in some cases these nonprofits are losing staff to King County, to the city of Seattle, because the governments are not setting aside sufficient funds to actually pay for the services that they're asking the nonprofits to provide. So we wanted to take a stand and say, yes, we're going to look at the funding we provide to ensure that the partners that we fund are able to pay an equitable wage, but we also want government to ask itself some tough questions. And if you saw, Mayor Harrell's recent budget did provide for an uptick in those contract salary costs. And we, like when I say we, like, so this is my husband and me, like the Bernier McCaw Foundation, like they're the 2 of us. Like we've existed since 2019. Like we are nobody in the scheme of things, but they read aloud our letter and the names of all the foundations, including SVP, that signed off on this letter in front of the Seattle City Council. It was read into the record, and there was one conservative council member who was adamantly opposed to it, who actually moved to neutral on it because of hearing the letter and the list of maybe 10 of us. So, I mean, I think policy, like, I need to be a major player to actually make a change, but this just proves you don't. Like, one voice, like, your little family foundation, or you and your husband, or you and your partner, or you alone, like, just putting your voice out there can actually make change happen, because they don't hear from us. And I remember a long time ago, I think it was Chris Gregoire said, you know, the nonprofit community is not on the table in Olympia, therefore they're on the menu. Like, they will be eaten alive because their voices aren't heard. So if you're on a board, I strongly urge you to become an advocate. When I joined the board of the YWCA, when I looked at our budget, I realized philanthropy, private philanthropy, corporate philanthropy was a tiny fraction. Most of our money was state, local government. So I learned very quickly that I could raise more money by showing up at a hearing or a meeting in Olympia than I could by filling a table at our annual luncheon. So I retooled my skills and thought about what networks I needed to build in order to secure that funding for the YWCA. So if you and your board haven't really stepped into the advocacy piece, first of all, it's not a bad word. Like, we're prohibited from lobbying directly for candidates, we all know that. But there's a lot of issue advocacy and education that you can do, and it really matters when they don't just see the executive director or program director, but an actual board member or volunteer in the room alongside saying, this really matters. So I guess, you know, I think I'm not big enough to make a difference, but I realize, like, they listen to constituents' voices, and that's what I am. I'm a constituent, I need to use my voice.
Can you say more about how you changed your skill set to accommodate that shift?
Well, I've never even been to a hearing in Olympia, like I was the judiciary committee, so I just started showing up, you know, to see what it was like, and then, you know, I would say, give me my talking points, or I would sign in to testify on behalf of a bill or in opposition to a bill. I was also lucky, I was an attorney, so I got involved with a committee that helped draft legislation. So at one point I would have the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee call me and go, Beth, hey, somebody floated this bill idea in front of me. What do you think? Is this a good idea? Because he knew I was a lawyer, knew how to write a bill, and also like cared about housing. So some of it was like just meeting different people and building a relationship with them. So, and just not being afraid. And there's no perfect way to do it. Like, I didn't have to be the perfect orator or, you know, the perfect advocate. I just had to kind of show up and wing it. And what's so interesting in Olympia in particular, like, the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee was literally the only lawyer on the whole committee. You know, you've got dentists, veterinarians, someone that owns an auto parts store in Walla Walla. Like, they know that, and they know they're not experts. Like, they are interested in hearing from people who have lived experience, real experience. I've been on this nonprofits board for 20 years. I see what's happening in my community, and I can bring them those stories in a way that they can't access otherwise. So I think it's just kind of putting my fear to the side and just going for it.
Can I just interject real quick? That was the promo reel for come to the fourth session.
I was gonna say the same thing. So, Karen, I see you have a question. I'm just gonna plug, Terry's actually gonna be leading our fourth session. It's virtual, but it's actually the skill set, building your skill set to do that. It is not as scary as you think. And if you're an introvert, if you're an extrovert, there are all different ways to do it. But Karen, so you had your hand raised.
Are we doing that part of hearing from us, or do we?
No, go ahead, ask a question.
So,
Conversation.
as I said, I just moved here. I moved from St. Louis, and I wore two hats in St. Louis. One is as a donor, and one is I started 4 nonprofits. So I ask and I give. And I was the only person in the whole place, the whole area, who had both hats. So it really is interesting to be wearing both hats at the same time. And so I've had a journey, somewhat similar to some of you, in figuring out who to give, when to give, how to give, all that. And one of the first things when people came and asked for money, I insisted on 2 things. One is they had to be collecting some kind of data. I mean, to learn what wasn't working and what was working, and to do more of what was working. And they had to have some kind of collaborations or partnerships with other organizations who were doing similar things and not just have their own little fiefdom kind of thing. And so many people, I don't have any data, we don't have any data, we don't know where to go for, we don't have the money for it, and so I would help them find either a university or someone to do that. And many of them did not pursue that and didn't really collect the data or even interested in. And the other one, some of them also were so afraid of other partnerships and collaborations with the money, their donors, people. And part of it is about St. Louis, which is so conservative and so red and so racist. But it was very hard to get people to move. And so the question I'm getting to is, what did you use? Because then I broadened it and wanted a board that looked at it a certain way, and the staff actually looked a certain way. I don't want to get a bunch of white people. But what did you all use as sort of a scrim of what you would give money to and organizations that would make a difference? I mean, there's 1.5 million nonprofits in America. Way too many, and too many of them are not making a difference. $441 billion was given last year. That is enormous amount not to move the needle. So what do you all use on how to decide from going from 14 to 70 and wanting to give to places that make a difference and move the needle?
Well, it is a hard problem. And what's kind of interesting is, I think when we initially started, we kind of felt bad, like we were learning the SVP model, and back at the beginning, it was all about metrics and outcomes, and I even supported multiple nonprofits like doing their outcomes database for United Way so they could get funding, and all sorts of reporting for funding. But we never, in our personal philanthropy, never put that burden on nonprofits. We just trusted. And part of it, I'll admit, is it was too much work to do all that, asking for all that data, and also it seemed unfair. Like, we're giving you $5,000. How can we expect you to bend over backwards to provide data that you've got better things to do with your time as a nonprofit? And so our thinking is very much changed on that. I used to feel guilty that I wasn't being a good steward of the dollars by looking for that data. And now I can say, hey, I've always been a trust-based philanthropist. But the reality is, I do buy into it's the relationships you make, it's the people you meet, it's trusting the leaders. So, through SVP and other nonprofits I work with, you meet the leaders, the executive director, the senior staff people. And if you can believe in them, then give them the dollars to do the work. And I truly believe that also, as we've moved more money to pool funds where the community that's being served has much more input on what the solutions are. So I no longer buy into this, we need metrics to prove that you're doing the right thing. I've accepted the fact that I'm not the expert, and I've got to trust the community that's being underserved, that they're going to figure out what is most meaningful for them, and I'm going to move the money there and let them decide. So I didn't really answer your question. I said the opposite.
But on collaboration, yes. So Eastside Pathways, collective action organization, 80 plus partners. Collaboration is good. Collaboration is when you can align and do more together than you can apart. You can fill gaps, you can, and also, Eastside Pathways, we are the conveners of all these organizations, but we're not funding or doing any program pieces. We're doing the hard work of aligning racial equity goals and identifying root causes of why the East Side is not preparing all children to be ready for kindergarten. So we're looking for those root causes and bringing organizations together. So yes, on collaboration, we do want our organization, the organizations we fund, to be collaborative. And we look for leaders that are collaborative, so that's the easy way to know that, if a leader is collaborative.
The other final thought I wanted to add, we also have really tried to move more money to the orgs that are also working on systems change and advocacy and their C4s. Because you can fund, thousands of nonprofits doing direct service, but we're not going to change society as a whole until we fundamentally change the big levers, which is government, right? It's all government money that has the biggest levers for change. And so supporting the groups that are doing the hard research work to come up with new policies and then advocating for them, that's where I think all donors need to make sure they're giving to some of those orgs, because that's where the long-term impact will come from, at least.
I would say that I kind of shifted my mindset a little bit on your question, which is recognizing that all players are part of a collective action or part of a system. So no one organization or individual is responsible for moving an outcome in society or whatever outcome that you're trying to move. So particularly in education, like educational outcomes can be contributed by before school, after school, the parent, the community, the out of school enrichment, the actual curriculum in the classroom, the teacher professional development, all of that plays a role. But I would shift your question a little bit to say, ask the organization, what measure are they gearing their work towards? And how do they show up their work, their activities, their strategy to aligning to that measure? And how do you show, when you're asking for progress, or if you're asking for, how can you show that your work is leading towards moving that measure? So it's a different shift on the same question, because no one can be responsible or take the ownership or the weight of an outcome. And I do believe in both qualitative and quantitative data, and that means that survey data and asking their community that they serve, the role that they play, is just as important as the quantitative results that they are getting. And so marrying them both together can actually understand their role in moving a specific measure in a community.
Is it okay if I share a quick story on this topic? I'm a lead partner with United Indian Small Tribe Foundation. So I'm gonna, Renee, do you mind if I get to Laura first, just because she's in? I am gonna pass
I was
the
going to
message.
switch gears if there's a follow-up.
Is it a follow-up?
It was a little, well, it was a follow-up about sort of the balance between what you were talking about, that, qualitative and
I'm gonna keep
quantitative.
it quick.
Okay.
And would you hand it to Laura after?
So there was a recent article about military base schools. It was really interesting. It was, I think, the New York Times about a week ago, and the conclusions were stunning and not surprising, which was that at the bases where the schools are, and they're public schools, the students are diverse, across income, race, ethnicity. The teachers are paid well, better than average. There is active coaching that goes on constantly. And I think the class size is not particularly small, not overwhelmingly large. And lo and behold, these students perform, across all sectors well above, the national median. And you're like, oh, stunning, not really, And so I find that we are often at these, in these points where we have the data, we understand kind of what works, and it really does come down to what the core values are, nationally, at the state level, locally. And that's where my shift has really kind of come around, advocacy being the only solution, to the extent that you can shift people's perspectives on values and willingness to fund, those things that we already know work, and it's just, that's for me the $1 million question of how do you do that work? How do you shift perspective electorate, and, to make those, to be able to make those advocacy decisions.
And I do think we all have that role to play too in the organizations where we serve on the board, because your budget is your value statement, right?
If your budget doesn't just reflect your mission, but also your values, and so I think for me to be able to authentically show up and try to shame government officials into creating a budget for the city that shows the city's values, that I've got to be doing that on every board I serve as well. So I think that's part of the equitable wage conversation. Again, I think that's all a role that we can all play. And then to be able to say and, like every budget, city budget, county budget, state budget, nonprofit budget, like we all build on each other and reflect the values of our country.
What do you all see as next? Like, where do we need to go next to continue to push it? Like, what do you see coming around the corner? Or what's needed, really? Because I don't think we've gone far enough by any stretch, so.
I think what Beth said a moment ago.
It was such a mic drop moment that I actually would have done with what you said, which was, if I do think that we're in a room right now of folks who have done their own work in terms of racial equity journey, that if I were to say what's next is that for more philanthropists to understand their place of power and privilege and do their own journey making and understanding where they sit on systems that were set up for them to succeed. Yeah. That there's more of that and Kathy's in the world.
Well, and I think, we all have had different life experiences, and I spoke recently to a group, and we were talking about finding your passion, and a woman told me that her passion was to fund me to write the book about how I was doing my philanthropy and professional philanthropy. I'm pretty sure that's not your passion, and I don't think it's a good idea, because we are looking at it as holistic community care, and it is deeply personal to who we are, and we're trying to work in a multiracial, cross-class, collaborative of individuals. Mine is very personal to my family's history and how the privilege and wealth in my family has been accumulated over time, and new wealth. My husband is a first-generation American, but he presents as white and like he's been here forever. And we are continuing to accumulate wealth because of his job. So it's hard for me to say like what's next, because I don't want to tell someone this is how you should do philanthropy next. Like this should, because I worry that I love Pia from the Whitman Institute. I love that the Whitman Institute's their spin down process is to preach and teach trust-based philanthropy all over the country. And I think it has moved philanthropy, institutional philanthropy, in a very important way. But I guess as an individual who's stumbling over rocks in the path, I'm very reluctant to say this is the next big thing for philanthropy. All I know is that for me it's relationship based, and I see that my liberation, my healing, the healing of my lineage, the healing of my daughter, her liberation is intricately connected, intertwined with the healing and liberation I'm getting teary, of everyone in this community and beyond. So for me, I follow Dr. Johnny Powell from UC Berkeley, your circle of concern. And I am committed to making my circle of concern as large as it possibly can be, which may mean that my pebbles, I hope, will ripple out, but they're small. And if I am changing one family by assisting them as a Black family to build intergenerational wealth. I'm not willing to say it's wrong. I'm saying it's wrong to hoard it for white people. I believe all of us should have intergenerational wealth. And so if I can, my pebble can do that for one other family, then that is the best I can do, and I'm okay with that.
You just planted another big seed in my head by mentioning the work from UC Berkeley. So one thing that really does inspire me is this idea around targeted universalist design and targeted universalist design. That's a how?
And that's still John Powell.
John Powell. That's from John Powell from UC Berkeley that she mentioned earlier. And the reason being is so much of either programs or systems that we have today were designed by people with power and privilege. And so if you flip that and go, how can you actually think about your programming by, if it is a community-based organization who's giving direct service, use an example, by collecting the insights and the lived experiences of those who you're trying to work with and co-designing your experiences with them. And thinking about, so targeted universalism is really thinking about how are you centering the voices and designing for them, and that actually will serve a larger population. It's the whole curve effect. You know, the curve is designed for some, but can fit for everybody. I do think if we think about, so it's really interesting is like my undergrad experiences, like I've built upon that. So I came from a user-centered design background, and now I think a lot about like equity-centered design. What does it mean when the people who are designing the thing that you're designing, whether it's program or curriculum, or is designed by the lived experiences of who you're trying to serve?
Well, I think his curb cut example is the perfect example of, again, this zero-sum mindset, right? And I think that is a big shift. And even within, nonprofits asking them to compete against each other for, funding. There's only so much resource to go around. But I think his example of the curb cut is that when it was, when the disability community pushed for curb cuts, all of a sudden,
It didn't make it harder for me as an able-bodied person to walk, but when I had a baby in a stroller, it sure as hell made my life a lot easier. And then when I had knee surgery and needed to be on a scooter, it sure as hell made my life a lot easier. Like, it wasn't a zero-sum game. You don't do one thing that serves one community and all of a sudden everyone else, it is, targeted universal. It makes it actually easier for everybody. So, yeah, I think there is, and this, oh God, okay, I told you I wasn't going to tell you what to do, but this thing about risky investments, that it's risky to fund this organization, like that is nonsense, and it just needs to stop. And I know you all are stopping that, but I used to say, if you look at venture capitalists, you fund 20, 30 companies. If one hits a home run, you're rich and brilliant. And then in the philanthropy, like, we're supposed to, like, every nonprofit that we fund is supposed to hit a home run all the time. And guess what? They're not making widgets, right? They're solving poverty. They're solving homelessness. Like, we're asking them to tackle the biggest things of all time, and we expect them to hit a home run with that $10,000 grant every time. And if we don't know enough, they're too risky for us to invest the money in. So I think this whole conversation about risk in philanthropy is just nonsense. So, yeah. So
I think we have time for like one more question, but also Kathy and Dave, if you wanted to respond.
I would just say shift power, so shifting power to people of color, to communities who are most adversely affected by our systemic inequity, so shifting power.
So your last example just made me think of, because I keep getting stung by how do you change people's minds, or how do you shift the conversation from kind of what to why, like a value conversation. And the curb cut is a really interesting one because the disability community, they had to literally throw their bodies, in front of legislators, people, they were, seen as people who should be kept in the shadows, should not be seen, they were upsetting. That was a huge movement that spent decades trying to gain rights. But it wasn't until they could really get in front of people and tell their story. I think the documentary Crip Camp, it's amazing, you should all watch it. I think it's called Crip Camp, but it's about the disability community, the movement, And that shifted, that documentary got in front of a lot of people and it shifted values. And I'm still, yes to everything that you're saying, but how do you tell the story? How do you broaden the conversation to get people to start thinking about all the things that we, everyone, I think a majority of Americans want everyone, I would hope, I believe, most people want other people to lead productive, happy, safe lives. I hope that's true. And if you could tell that story of how do we allow everyone to try and lead a happy, safe, productive life, not just some people.
And I think it's back to Brian Stevenson's concept of getting proximate, right? And it's not about putting the burden on that community to make themselves visible to us, right? It's the burdens on us with the power and the privilege and the wealth and the whiteness to.
But how do you tell that story? Because we just spent the last 5 years with Black Lives Matter, a whole bunch of people saying, "Oh, you're making me feel bad. You're making me feel guilty. I don't like feeling that way." Ugh. And I think the school board thing that we're seeing happening all over the country, it's people being told, "I don't want you to make me feel bad. It makes me mad." Right? And we have to shift that conversation. I'm sorry if I'm getting also emotional, but how do you shift that conversation so people can stop hearing that?
Yeah. Well, I
And
think
start
it's
hearing, look, how do we care for each other?
yeah, and it's also like, I'm again don't know how to say this well, so I'll just say it. I was really blessed to have a Black colleague and friend who, said to a group of women at Washington Women's Foundation, if you as white women are having a conversation about these things and you're feeling comfortable, you better believe I don't. And so that's, this whole don't make me feel bad. Well, if you're not feeling bad, I guarantee you there's someone else feeling bad in the room. And I don't know how we uplift our entire community. It's back to the acknowledgement, it's all the steps, but I mean, that's, and the zero sum. There's only so much comfort to go around, which is nonsense, but that's where we are.
Right.
If I'm uncomfortable, then I need to hoard whatever that brings me that comfort back.
That's smart, that comfort is not some zero sum.
I mean, could ping pong back and forth with you all day, which is I once heard someone say, it's so hard to understand how to move educational outcomes for Black, Latino, and low-income kids in the classroom. Try being one. Try being a Black boy at a classroom in Seattle Public Schools. Right? It's the only way that you're going to get that is hearing from the lived experiences from,
Thank you all. And Renee, I think the same question came up, how do we change this? It's policy change, but policy change requires people actually making those changes, us advocating to our lawmakers to actually vote on those changes, and then upholding those in the courts, like the capital gains tax. And, what ends it is this narrative around we're all worthy.
Right.
And I just, it was Anne that said that, but it reminded me, it's not that you are bad, but that we are all, I think, we are all worthy. You can see it, it really is as a national level to remind ourselves. And it reminds me, we did the last new grant committee that we did with SVP, David was on, one of the questions that came up as they were piloting or essentially testing different ways to decide who would get the grant. And Pamela Oates, who's on our board, you might see her on a postcard, facilitated one of the two groups. And the group that she facilitated, she would remind us, like, hey, everybody's worthy. Like, at the end of the day, we're not going to make a bad choice as a committee about who gets this grant. So we need to kind of be able to move on because everybody's part of this ecosystem of change. But so, you know, with that said, at the end of the day, like SVP has scarce resources, but we can open our ties and hopefully other groups that come to us can get funded. But we have to remember in all of this, no one is more or less worthy. It's just at this moment in time, we're making one decision. But I think that has stuck with me since then. I think it feels particularly, you know, right now, it feels like a really, really heavy lift, but I think it's something that kind of gives me a beacon of hope in these times. I want to thank all of our panelists. This was amazing. I want to thank you for sharing your journey, and then really, I love how you did the years because it really is a journey. Like it's not like I think we think oh we just got here, but oh my gosh, you were going back to the 2000s and how this really has been a journey in decades. And Shri, I just brought up reminding us all everybody we are part of a much larger ecosystem of change. But also, we all need to go dig into this equity-centered design and the targeted universalist design, and I love that. And that's something I'll take away. And Beth, thank you for sharing everything that you did. I love that letter that you really you all worked on and we signed showed it does particularly. And I will say when philanthropists use their voice, it makes a difference. There is, I think. All of our voices make a difference, but we as philanthropists can use our voices even more because that conservative city council member probably heard some of those foundations and thought, that's gonna shift me a little bit. And that just the pebble. Thank you for that. I think that's something that really will stick with me. So thank you all. This was really a special, intimate conversation. So big thank you. So I want to just plug that this is part of a series. In the next one, we're going to hear about specific policies that are going to be in the Washington State legislative session. So we talked about some city and county policies, but these are policies that will be going on. So we'll be hearing from Senator Noel Frame, as well as 3 former, they are current executive directors, but former grantees of SVP, who will be sharing the work they're doing on policy in Olympia. That will be here on November 9th. Is that right? Yes. And the QR code is over there, and then we'll also have a virtual session where Terry is going to share actually do the skill set. So thank you all, and thank you to our speakers, and everyone have a great night. Thank you.